So the UK is going downhill very fast in pretty much every metric. What's funny about the UK is that they like to call themselves a wealthy and prosperous country, but are they really? If you dive deeper and you look at the stats and you take the UK economy but remove London from it, and even by extension remove the financial industry and a couple of the very rich industries in London from the UK economy, you will actually realize that the UK will barely be a rich country based on many different statistics, which is sad to see. I used to live in the UK, but as I was seeing what was happening there, the crime was increasing, taxes were going up, services were declining, I realized that this was no longer the place where I want to live, so I ended up leaving, and now I sort of live around the world. And it seems like every single day when I hear about the things that are happening, I'm more and more glad that I left, and I'm more and more convinced that it was the right decision. Every conversation with a person from the UK seems to now go into how bad it is there, how everyone wants to leave, and everything is just very, very pessimistic. But there's still people out there who are like, sure, the UK might be bad, but where else would I go? I certainly wouldn't live somewhere like Asia in those poor countries. So what's interesting and what sort of made me make this video is I spent the past few months in what many people would call quote unquote poor countries in Indonesia, in Vietnam, and a lot of these other countries in Asia. And what struck me is that a lot of things in these countries are much better than in the rich country of the UK. So to dive deeper into this, let's look at what are the things that you would expect from living in a rich and prosperous country, and does the UK really live up to that, and how does it compare in these metrics to living in these more developing countries? The first thing is safety. You might expect that if you live in a country that is rich, that has a bunch of resources, they might be able to keep that country safe. But in the UK and in a lot of the West, this is simply not the case. Crime is going up, and it was never really a safe place. I lived in London for a few years, and it was a notoriously dangerous place. Like I've told this story many times, there was stabbings literally every single week on the street where I lived. Now, of course, I was a student, I was not living in the best areas, but this just wouldn't happen in a place like Bangkok, in a place like Bali. How can this be? Well, I think there's two reasons. The first reason is going to be cultural. If you have a culture where people respect each other, where it's simply not the norm to do bad things to other people, then that country is gonna be safer. But the UK never really had a culture like that. There's a lot of division, and I don't want to get into like the politics of it, but there's a lot of people coming into the countries from perhaps places where this isn't the culture, and that is causing a lot of crime. And then amongst the native population as well, there's a lot of homeless people, there's a lot of people really not doing that great in places like London, and when you have nothing to lose, like, you're more inclined to commit crimes. And the other reason is the laws and the policing. The UK police is notoriously a joke. Like, if something happens, they are literally not going to do anything. Like, UK police literally looks like this. Who's going to be afraid of someone like that? The other thing you would expect is opportunities to build wealth and make money. Now, there's sort of two categories here. You've got the local people in local currency, local pay, and location independent folks like me who can earn money elsewhere and live in that location. Now, for local income, of course, still incomes in these developing countries are on a gross level is going to be much lower. So for those people, if they want to buy products from other countries, it's going to be much harder. That is undeniable. But it's no longer nearly as obvious that when you compare local salaries to local rents and cost of local food, that life in the UK is like much better or something. If you compare the net salary of the tax in London, like people in London, like regular people in London, in these rich and prosperous countries, they cannot even afford to live at all in the capital or in many of the cities in the UK, because costs are going up, inflation is sky high, but the wages and the sort of productivity of the society is not keeping up, which is why what's a funny thing that's happening, a lot of people that are going there from places like Eastern Europe, these poor countries, are now going back to their home countries because they're realizing that they're literally not saving any money in the UK. But of course, the real hack is if you can earn your money online where your income is not tied to your location. Of course, not easy to achieve, but if you manage to achieve that and you have income that you can earn anywhere, there's pretty much zero reason for you to live in places like the UK. Perhaps 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even if you could earn your money anywhere, you could still make the case that places like the UK are the best place to be because of how much you actually get for that high cost of living. So I'm not just saying that you should just try to live as cheaply as possible and like penny pinch on everything. The point is, the cost relative to value in places like the UK has declined drastically. The second thing you might expect from living in a high-income, rich country is infrastructure. And for a long time, this was definitely true. Infrastructure in places like the UK, everyone was proud of the amazing NHS healthcare that you would get. The roads were good, things like this. But now it is no longer really the case. There are huge queues in the healthcare, like regular people who are paying for this healthcare from their taxes cannot even get appointments because everything is so overcrowded. There's not enough resources to support the infrastructure. The roads there have potholes. Like if you live in apartments there in London, they're like very old. They might not have air conditioning. They might not have proper heating, or if they have heating, the heating bills are so high that you literally have to ration whether you can use it or not. And a big reason for this is a lack of investment into infrastructure, which is also stemming from the fact that the governments in these places are completely broke. Again, a rich and prosperous country, but somehow the government is completely broke because they are mismanaged. The funds are being spent on all these welfare programs and all of that, but money is no longer coming in because working hard, building businesses is discouraged through crazy levels of taxation and many other reasons. And in places like Bangkok, while there are very poor areas still, it's still a developing place, a lot of the city these days is more modern than London. Like some of the areas where you can walk around, like it feels more like Singapore than a developing country. Super modern buildings with modern new condos where internet speeds can be much faster than they ever were in London. In the UK, people are just stuck in the pride of, oh, but we have these amazing historic Victorian buildings. But the reality of these amazing historic Victorian buildings is that they're just old and crappy and sort of literally breaking down in some cases. And the last thing is freedoms. One of the things we associate the West and places like the UK with is freedom of speech. Like, sure, things might be bad, but at least you can criticize the government. Well, not so much anymore. There's now this new law called the Online Safety Bill in the UK, where you can literally be sent to jail or punished for saying certain things on social media. And by the way, I'm not necessarily commenting on like whether this is right or wrong. Like there is definitely a place in society for moderating certain kinds of things. Like you shouldn't allow people to literally incite someone to kill someone else, for example. But definitely things like this now mean that you're no longer just allowed to say whatever you want. You were pretty much never allowed to actually say whatever you want. Anyway, in these Western countries, there's just this illusion that because you can criticize the prime minister, this is a free country where you can do whatever you want. Whereas in reality, there's certain things, like certain agendas they have. If you went against those agendas, you spoke out against them, you would be silenced, perhaps not with jail, but with cancellations and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, it just happens slightly differently and they're slightly less direct about it. And what matters to most people is not freedom in terms of like, oh, I can say whatever I want online, or I can riot on the streets. Like I would never riot on the streets anyway. What matters to people most of the time is, do I have a good life? Do I have enough money to afford a great standard of life? Do I have the freedom to actually keep the money that I make rather than giving half of it forcibly to the government every single year? By the way, if you don't give half of your money as a high earner to the government every year, they are going to put you in jail. So you don't have freedom of your money. I much rather have financial freedom than the freedom to ride on the streets, which I wouldn't really use anyway. So if you're in the UK right now, where can you go? Well, you have many different options. The option that I recommend for most entrepreneurs, specifically if you're either a high earner or an entrepreneur, especially if you have an online business, is Dubai. That is where I recommend most people set up their business or have their business base, because it's very easy to move there. You get 0% or 9% corporate tax, sort of depending on your revenue levels. And you get a place that is going up, that is actually improving in all of these things rather than declining. And by the way, if you're looking to move to the UAE, then I have partners down below that can help you do that. We have helped more than 100 people set up businesses and get residency legally in the UAE, and the reviews, well, you can just look at the reviews yourself online. They're all absolutely amazing. Everyone has had a great experience. You can book a free call with us if you're interested. Other options are Thailand. You can get what's called a Thai Elite visa for a very long-term residency. I will leave a link down below in the description. Again, a very easy process. Or for a more shorter-term option, they have what's called a Destination Thailand visa. The other place I really like is Bali in Indonesia. If you want to live there full-time, you have the remote worker visa that gives you the legal right to run a remote business and work remotely from the country. So that is a great option. Other options, Singapore, Malaysia, a bunch of different places around Asia, around Latin America, around Eastern Europe. So I would just encourage you to open up your eyes. The West, especially the UK, is no longer the greatest, the most amazing place to live in the world. It of course still possibly is for some people. Everything depends on your situation. But again, I would just encourage you to open up your eyes, look into the world, see what's out there. And if you do that, I think you will realize that as much as the UK is heralded as this rich, prosperous country, the actual reality on the ground, on what life is actually like, is nowhere near as good as you were perhaps told it was. And there are options out there that can give you much more for much less. But that is where I will leave the video. If you are looking to leave the UK and you're not sure sort of how it works, you're not sure what you need to do, what is the actual process to become non-resident, then you're not alone. It's not an easy thing to understand, and there's quite a few steps involved and like things you absolutely need to do right. So if you're looking for a step-by-step guide on leaving the UK, then I recommend watching this video right here. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.